So this, is the worst manufacturing economy. We're in a recession. We've been in an ongoing recession. It is a disaster. It is a manufacturing recession. Most of the jobs, or a lot of the jobs that they've created, are for the people who lost their manufacturing jobs.
Peter Schiff warns that the economy is in a manufacturing recession, and the government's actions aren't helping. He argues that tariffs, like those proposed by Trump, won't fix the problem because they hurt American consumers who end up paying more for products. Schiff believes the real issue is high taxes and regulations that make it too expensive to manufacture in the U.S. Instead of relying on tariffs, he suggests cutting government spending and reducing taxes and regulations to allow the economy to grow naturally.
So we need a pro-growth policy, and that means a smaller government, because the way you grow an economy is you shrink government, because the economy grows itself. We don't need the government to grow the economy. It grows naturally. That's the beauty of capitalism. When it's not growing, it's because government is getting in the way. So what we need is the government to get out of the way. But that's not what Harris wants. Harris wants even more government on top of the government that we already have. Now, I don't want to just trash Harris, because Trump has been saying some things too that have been bothering me, particularly on tariffs. I was just watching this long interview he had. I think it was somebody from Bloomberg that was interviewing Trump, and he was talking about tariffs, and he tariffs is my favorite word. I love that word. It's the best word in the dictionary. I love tariffs, right? Like they're not taxes, and he keeps talking about how he's going to put 100%. 200% tariffs on the Chinese, on other people. Like the Chinese are going to pay these tariffs. Like the Chinese are going to write a check and send the money into the U.S. government. No, the tariffs are not on China. They're on Americans who buy Chinese products. That's who pays the tariffs. That's who always pays the tariffs. If governments could tax foreigners with tariffs, that's all they would do, because they can't vote, right? If you could just tax people in other countries and not tax your own citizens, everybody would do that, and all we'd have is tariffs. Tariffs are paid by the people who are buying the product. So it's the Americans. Now, yes, they can impact the Chinese, because let's say the U.S. government, Trump, puts a big tariff on Chinese products. Yes, the Chinese will sell fewer products to Americans, but the products that they do sell will be at much higher prices. And so some Americans will stop buying Chinese product, and they'll just have to buy another product that maybe is cheaper than what the Chinese products are now, but a lot more expensive than it was before. Or in many cases, they just won't buy anything at all, because maybe the only item they can afford was made in China. And now that it's so expensive because of the tariff, they can't buy it at all. So they just buy nothing. So now the Chinese company loses out on that sale, but the American loses out on the merchandise. But those who can still afford to pay the higher prices will pay those prices. China will still get the sale. But the American will pay the tariff, and the U.S. government will collect that money. But it's not like the Chinese, okay, well, I didn't sell that product to an American. We're just going to, drop it in the Pacific Ocean. They're going to sell it to somebody else. So somebody in another country is going to get that product at a bit of a lower price. And so they end up winning, right? People who live in other countries. And the Chinese, maybe they sell their product for less than they would have got had they sold it in America, but they still sell it, right? They just don't sell it to an American because we can't afford it because of the tariff. And now somebody else buys it. Or the product stays in China. Somebody in China gets to buy it. They don't export it. They just sell it to somebody locally. Now, they were selling it to an American, but now the Americans can't afford it. So now the Chinese catch a break and they get to buy it. So it's not what Trump is saying. And Trump also thinks, and he's right on certain things. Yes, it's terrible that we've lost our manufacturing industry. It's terrible that so many things that we used to produce ourselves, we now import, right? That is a sign of America in decline. And he's right to point out that this is really a bad thing and we need to reverse. But simply imposing tariffs isn't going to do it. The reason that so much of our manufacturing has left the country is because it's too expensive to make it here. Why is it so expensive? Because of government, because of taxes, because of regulations that have artificially increased the cost of manufacturing in the United States. Now, Trump, to his credit, does talk somewhat about lowering taxes and reducing regulations. That should be the focus, not the tariffs. Because if you just impose massive tariffs, it's not like all these companies are going to start manufacturing in America. They can't, Because if they manufactured in America, the prices would be so high that they couldn't sell the products. That's why they left in the first place. They left to stay competitive. And if they come back under the current environment, they won't be. So we need massive deregulation in our labor markets and all sorts of regulations and tax before we have an environment where the tariffs would work, right? Because right now they won't, because we don't have the industry anymore. And we don't have the ability to replace it. We don't have the savings. We don't have the supply chains. We don't have the skilled work. He acts like I can put these tariffs on, and then magically, all these factories are just going to pop into existence, and we're just going to start producing all this stuff ourselves. We can't. It is not possible to happen. Now, would I prefer tariffs to income taxes? Sure. Yeah, if we could cut income taxes and raise tariffs, I'd rather have Americans pay tariffs than income tax. But it's going to take a long time to rebuild our industry. That has to happen. But Trump, again, is promising instant, a boom. Like, I'm going to put these tariffs on, and the next day, we're just going to be producing all this stuff. The companies are all going to rush back and make all this stuff here. It is not possible to do that. We don't have the factories and the supply chains and the workforce to do it, right? It's going to take a long time. We didn't lose all these industries overnight. It took decades for our manufacturing base to be exported to the rest of the world and disintegrate. We got these numbers out today. The New York State, Empire State Manufacturing Index, the only real economic number that came out today. Nobody really talked about it. Last month was like an aberration, and I talked about it on this podcast because we got a positive 11.5, and they were expecting another positive number, 2.7, and we ended up with minus 11.9. So big miss, another horrible number. Anything minus is contraction. So you need a plus number to be an expansion. Minus is contraction. So far, of the 22 months for last year, 2023, and this year, 2024, out of those 22 months, we've only had 2 positive numbers for the Empire State Manufacturing Index, and one of them was last month. And it's already been, now we're down. I mean, that has never happened. We have never had a 22-month period in the history of this index, which only goes back to about 2001. So it's not like they were coming up with this index, 100 years ago, right? So it's a relatively new index. But during those 22 years or so, 23 years that it's been around, we've never had a streak like this. So this, is the worst manufacturing economy. We're in a recession. We've been in an ongoing recession. It's laughable to hear Harris or Biden talk about the success, the comeback of manufacturing, how everything is great. It's a manufacturing renaissance. It is a disaster. It is a manufacturing recession. Most of the jobs, or a lot of the jobs that they've created, are for the people who lost their manufacturing jobs. And now they had to replace one good manufacturing job with 2 or 3 lousy service sector jobs, right? That's the secret to job creation. Destroy a good job so you can create 2 or 3 lousy jobs, and now you take credit for the extra number of jobs that were created. But so these are the numbers. You can't solve this just by erecting a bunch of tariffs. And another thing that people forget when it comes to tariffs is a lot of stuff gets exported. So unless you're going to credit back the tariff, because let's say I'm a U.S. company and I'm manufacturing stuff, but I don't manufacture all the parts. A lot of the stuff that I need, I import, right? And then I export the finished product. Well, if you really jack up the cost of my imports, when I go to re-export it, I'm not going to be competitive on the global market. So the only way you can get around that is maybe have an export credit so that if I pay the tariff on the way in, if I don't sell it to an American, I get the tariff back. It's only if I sell it to an American that I'm stuck paying the tariff, which means I have to stick the tariff on my American customer, right? But that's also an admission that the Americans pay the tariffs if you have to rebate them back for the exports. But if you don't rebate them back, then you've destroyed that company's ability to compete internationally because now you've jacked up its price. So you're really not going to make industries competitive with these tariffs. It's just, it's not going to work. It's going to backfire. Yeah, the government will raise some revenue from the tariffs, but it's going to raise the revenue from Americans. Now, Americans need to pay higher taxes, unfortunately, unless you cut spending. I would prefer the government cut the hell out of spending so we don't need higher taxes. But if you're going to have $3-4 trillion a year deficits, yeah, you could take Elon Musk and put him in charge of some efficiency committee and, even allow him to cut spending, which, but if you're taking all the big ticket items off the table, Social Security, Medicare, Obamacare, national defense, and in fact, you're going to increase those. And when Trump says, I'm not going to tax Social Security benefits, that's increasing Social Security benefits, right? It makes the program more expensive than it was before. So if you're going to increase entitlement spending, really doesn't matter what you do with the little teeny bit that's left over. And of course, you can't do anything about interest on the debt, which is rapidly becoming the biggest expenditure, really second only to Social Security when you've got over $1 trillion just for interest on the national debt. So we need these big cuts. If we're not going to get them, then Americans have to pay higher taxes. And one way is tariffs. But, it's not good that we have to pay tariffs. Again, I pointed this out before. The reason that we moved away from tariffs was because we created the income tax in 1913. The purpose of the income tax was to replace tariffs. And why? It was because the average American voter paid tariffs and he was not going to pay the income tax. That was the bait and switch. The politicians told American voters, we will stop the tariffs that are being paid by ordinary working Americans, and we will replace that lost revenue by taxing the billionaire. Just 1%, 2%. They can afford it. They're rich. We'll have this tiny little tax on the billionaires, right? On the Rockefellers, on the Carnegies, on the Vanderbilts, on the Mellons, all these rich families. They're going to pay their fair share. They're going to pay 1, 2, 3% income tax, and then we're not going to have tariffs anymore. And the voters bought it. They bought into it. And the next thing they knew, they got slapped with income taxes. And by the Second World War, all these Americans were paying income taxes. They started taking taxes out of their pay. Average American blue-collar workers were paying much higher taxes than were ever envisioned for the Carnegies and the Rockefellers and the Vanderbilts. And they were paying much higher income taxes than they ever paid in tariffs. So it was a deal with the devil, and we all got screwed. And of course, now they try the same thing. Oh, we got to make the millionaires, we want to, pay a wealth tax or tax on unrealized gains. All of this is a camel's nose under the tent. They're trying to get at the middle class, but they only can get to the middle class through the rich, because they're not going to vote for new taxes on themselves. That's why the revenue bills, right? A lot of people, I guess, don't remember this from their 8th grade civics course, but all tax bills have to originate in the House of Representatives. Why is that? Well, because when the Constitution was first written, only the House members were elected by the people. The senators were appointed by the state legislature. And so since the people directly elected the House, the members were more beholden to be held accountable for taxes that would affect the people. And of course, the House members were up for re-election every 2 years. So if you raise my taxes, I'm not going to vote for you. So the House was thought to be very reluctant to raise tax because they'd have to, explain it to the voters every 2 years why they just raised their tax. So Congress said, any bill to raise taxes must originate in the House that's closest to the people, which would be the House of Representatives. So people don't like paying tax, but a lot of people like getting government benefits. That's why we have so much inflation.
Thanks for watching. Peter Schiff makes it clear. We can't ignore the warning signs. Our manufacturing industry is in decline. Tariffs won't solve the problem, and government interference is stifling economic growth. Schiff emphasizes that true prosperity comes from shrinking the government's role, reducing taxes, and cutting regulations, not from imposing more tariffs. It's a long-term process, but the key is a pro-growth strategy that gets government out of the way. If you found this video insightful, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more updates on the economic landscape. See you next time.